The Poltergeist curse theory stems from the belief that the production was hexed primarily because the crew used real human skeletons as props for the iconic swimming pool scene in the first film. The act of desecration mirrors the movie's own plot, where a family is terrorized by spirits because their home is built atop a cemetery. Believers in this curse argue that this decision invited an evil and malevolent supernatural force to attach itself to the cast and crew, leading to a string of subsequent real-life tragedies. The theory has gained widespread notoriety due to the shocking and untimely deaths of several key actors across the movies. The most cited tragedies are the murder of 22-year-old Dominique Dunne, who played the older sister Dana, by her ex-boyfriend just months after the first film's release, and the sudden death of 12-year-old Heather O'Rourke, the star of the film, Carol Ann, from septic shock during the production of the third film. The deaths of two other actors from the sequel, Julian Beck and Will Sampson, further fueled the dark legend surrounding the franchise. This is a story of the cursed film of Poltergeist. Let's get spooky. Hey spooky people, it's your best friend Kenny, and we are back with another spooky and disturbing story. Before we get to today's story, let's make sure that you're subscribed to this channel. Please like, share, and hype this video. Thank you. In the summer of 1982, audiences were captivated by a new kind of horror film. Poltergeist was a unique cinematic event, a masterful blend of Steven Spielberg's signature suburban wonder with the visceral terror of director Tobe Hooper. The film introduced the world to the Freeling family, whose dream life in the idyllic Cuesta Verde subdivision became a waking nightmare. They soon discovered their home was built upon a desecrated cemetery, and a host of spirits led by an evil, malevolent entity known as the Beast abduct their youngest daughter, Carol Ann, through her bedroom closet. The film was a blockbuster, but over the subsequent years, a narrative far more disturbing than the one on screen began to take shape: the theory that the film itself was cursed. The legend of the Poltergeist curse is that a series of tragic deaths, bizarre on-site accidents, and eerie coincidences were not just random misfortunes, but the direct result of a malevolent evil force unleashed upon the production. And the story finds itself in fertile ground on a Hollywood landscape already familiar with tales of cursed production, with films like The Exorcist and The Omen, which have their own mythologies of on-set disasters and spooky occurrences. Yet, the Poltergeist legend has been uniquely resilient and compelling, has become the most famous example of the cursed film trope. The foundation of the Poltergeist curse is a fact. The production used real human skeletons in the film's terrifying climax. The scene is one of the most iconic in horror history. As a storm rages, Diane Freeling, JoBeth Williams, slips and falls into the family's muddy, excavated pool. To her horror, corpses begin to erupt from the mud, their skeleton remains surrounding her in a gruesome underwater ballet, revealing the developer's lie that they had relocated the cemetery upon which the house was built. For years after the film's release, Williams herself was unaware of the grim reality of what she was filming. She recounted in later interviews that she had presumed the skeletons were standard props made of plastic or rubber. It was only years later that she was informed that she had been swimming with actual human remains. This left her and much of the crew deeply disturbed. Now I know what you're thinking. The filmmakers must have wanted some great authenticity to this film, and that's why they used real human skeletons. But nope. Far more mundane than that. Budget. Special effects makeup artist Craig Reardon bluntly put it, wake up and smell the budget. In the early 1980s, fabricating dozens of realistic, durable, and waterproof skeletons was an expensive process. It was significantly cheaper to purchase authentic medical-grade biological surgical skeletons, which were sourced from countries like India for educational and scientific use. This practice seems unthinkable by today's standards, but it wasn't unheard of at the time. This was a different era of filmmaking, with fewer regulations and less oversight over the use of human remains. So movies like Dawn of the Dead and even the original Pirates of the Caribbean attraction in Disneyland used real human skeletons. Reardon acquired 13 skeletons and dressed them to look like decaying cadavers. This has made him the center of the cursed narrative, a position he is personally offended by. He has spoken out about the ghoulishness of suggesting his practical decision could be responsible for the death of his colleague, emphasizing that he was simply working with the accepted industry norms of the time. The use of skeletons elevates the Poltergeist curse over other, more anecdotal Hollywood legend. The film's plot hinges on the idea that the family is tormented because their home was built on graves where only the headstones were moved, a cost-cutting measure by developers. In a stunning case of real life imitating art, the filmmakers themselves used real human skeleton remains as props, also as a cost-cutting measure. This created a perfect self-contained narrative loop where the sin of the filmmakers mirrored the sin of the fictional developers. The subsequent real-life tragedies were easily framed as logical supernatural consequence, the revenge of the disrespected dead, playing out just as it did in the movie. Unlike other cursed films whose legends are tied to abstract concepts like a demonic subject matter, Poltergeist has a crime scene in the swimming pool. At the emotional core of the Poltergeist curse are the real-life tragedies that befell 4 of its actors. Over a 6-year period spanning the release of the original, the production was marked by a series of deaths that, when viewed collectively, seem to form a disturbing pattern. However, if you look at it more closely, it's clear that they're a result of human stories of violence, illness, and medical misfortune, not the supernatural entities that they've been lumped under. On October 30th, 1982, just 5 months after Poltergeist premiered, 22-year-old actress Dominique Dunne was brutally strangled in the driveway of her West Hollywood home by her ex-boyfriend John Thomas Sweeney. She fell into a coma and died 5 days later after being removed from life support. Her death is often cited as the first strike of the curse, but in reality, this is a horrifying case of domestic violence, and it wasn't a random event. Sweeney had a documented history of abuse. During an argument a month prior, he had attacked and begun to strangle Dunne, who managed to escape and end the relationship. Her murder was the tragic and predictable result of intimate partner violence. The subsequent legal proceedings only compounded the tragedy. Sweeney was charged with first-degree murder, but the judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence of premeditation, instructing the jury to consider only lesser charges. Sweeney was later convicted of voluntary manslaughter and served just 2.5 years of a 6.5-year sentence. Framing Dunne's death as part of a supernatural curse shifts the focus away from her murderer and the failings of the justice system. It co-opts a clear story of a woman killed by a violent man and reframes it as a piece of spooky Hollywood lore, trivializing the real horror that she endured. The most shocking death connected to the franchise was that of its young star, Heather O'Rourke. The blonde-haired child who delivered the iconic line, "They're here," died on February 1st, 1988, at the age of 12, just months before the release of Poltergeist III. The suddenness of her death is the fuel for the curse theory. However, the tragedy was rooted in medical complications, not supernatural forces. In 1987, O'Rourke had been misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease. Her death was ultimately caused by cardiac arrest and septic shock, which resulted from an acute bowel obstruction. An autopsy revealed she had suffered from congenital intestinal stenosis, a narrowing of the intestine present since birth that had gone undiagnosed her entire life. The tragedy was complicated by a wrongful death lawsuit filed by O'Rourke's mother against the hospital, claiming that the misdiagnosis constituted negligence and that a correct diagnosis would have led to life-saving surgery. One doctor's comment that her death was distinctly unusual, noting that such a severe birth defect should have caused lifelong digestive issues, provided the perfect opening for paranormal speculation. For believers in the curse, the unusual element was proof of otherworldly intervention. In reality, the shocking and unseemingly inexplicable death of a child became the ultimate fuel for a legend that offered a supernatural explanation for a tragedy that was otherwise too random and senseless to understand. The inclusion of 2 actors from Poltergeist II, The Other Side, in the curse narrative is an example of confirmation bias. Proponents of the theory often point to the deaths of Julian Beck and Will Sampson to bolster their number of victims, while conveniently omitting the critical context of their long-term health struggles. Julian Beck, who delivered a haunting performance as the skeletal villain Reverend Kane, was already dying when he took the role. He had been diagnosed with stomach cancer in 1983, well before filming began. His gaunt, terrifying appearance on the screen wasn't a special effect. It was a real-life result of his illness. He passed away in September 1985, shortly after completing his work on the film. Similarly, Will Sampson, who played the heroic shaman Taylor, had been battling scleroderma for decades. This is a chronic degenerative disease that severely affected his heart, lungs, and skin, causing his weight to drop from 260 pounds to 140 pounds. He died at the age of 53 from post-operative kidney failure following a high-risk heart-lung transplant, a procedure that had a very low survival rate at the time. Both men's deaths were tragedies. They're deeply unfortunate, but they weren't mysterious nor were they unexpected. They were included in the curse narrative because they fit a pre-existing pattern, demonstrating the human tendency to seek out evidence that confirms a belief, even if the evidence is taken out of context. Beyond the major tragedies, the Poltergeist curse is fleshed out with a collection of anecdotal stories from set. Tales of malfunctioning equipment, near misses, and paranormal interventions that, when woven together, create an atmosphere of pervasive supernatural interference. These are less dramatic than the deaths, but the incidents provide connective tissue for the growing legend. One of the most frequently cited events occurred during the filming of the original movie. In the scene where young Robbie Freeling is attacked by a possessed clown doll, the mechanical prop malfunctioned. The clown's arms wrapped too tightly around actor Oliver Robin's neck, and he began to choke for real. According to the story, the crew, including Steven Spielberg, initially thought the boy's panic cries of "I can't breathe" were brilliant improvisation. It wasn't until Robin's face started to change color that they realized he was in actual danger and intervened. The incident is a clear example of a dangerous on-set mechanical failure. It has been quickly reinterpreted through the supernatural lens of a curse, making a physical attack. The atmosphere of anxiety carried over to the production of Poltergeist II. Unsettled by the use of real skeletons in the first film and the subsequent murder of Dominique Dunne, the cast and crew reportedly felt a palpable sense of unease on set. This led to another cornerstone of the curse legend: the on-set exorcism. Actor Will Sampson, who is a real-life shaman of the Muskogee Creek Nation, sensed the collective fear and one night after shooting Wrapped performed a cleansing ritual to rid the set of negative energy. Crew members reported feeling a sense of relief the next day. While believers cite this as proof that there was a genuine evil presence to be expelled, it can also be understood as a compassionate spiritual act by Sampson to calm the real anxieties of his colleagues. Other smaller claims have been added to the lore over the years. Jo Beth Williams has mentioned that during the filming of the first movie, she would return to her home each day to find pictures on her walls crooked, even after straightening them that morning. Decades later, another actor with a minor role, Richard Lawson, survived a plane crash that killed 27 other people, an event that has been connected back to the film's supposed curse. A film set dealing with themes of death and desecration is a psychologically fertile ground for the power of suggestion. Once the initial curse narrative took hold, fueled by the skeleton controversy and Dunne's murder, it created a feedback loop. Ordinary accidents, technical glitches, and personal anxieties were no longer seen as isolated events, but were filtered through the lens of the curse, each one becoming another piece of evidence that reinforced the legend's perceived reality. When the chilling anecdotes are stripped away and the tragedies are examined, the Poltergeist curse begins to unravel, revealing itself to be less of a supernatural phenomenon and more of a construct of coincidence, psychological bias, and a profound misunderstanding of probability. Skeptical voices from within the production have long pushed back against the legend. Over the course of 3 films, produced over 6 years, hundreds of cast and crew members were employed. With any large group of people over a significant period, a certain number of illnesses, accidents, and tragedies is inevitable. The curse narrative is created by cherry-picking the 4 most dramatic deaths and a handful of on-set mishaps, while completely ignoring the vast majority of people involved, like Craig T. Nelson or Jo Beth Williams or producer Steven Spielberg, who emerged from the franchise perfectly healthy and unharmed. As an online comment said, "It's nothing compared to the Nosferatu curse. Every single person involved in that film has died." And they're right. This selective bias is a textbook example of confirmation bias, the psychological tendency to seek out and interpret information that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs. Once the idea of a curse was proposed, every subsequent misfortune was seen as proof. This is closely related to epiphania, the human brain's tendency to perceive meaningful patterns within random data. We are wired to connect the dots, and the Poltergeist story provided a series of very tragic dots that were all too easy to connect into a supernatural story. A good argument against the curse is an ethical one. To attribute these events to a supernatural force is to trivialize real human suffering. Blaming a curse for Dominique Dunne's murder detracts from the grim reality of domestic violence and absolves her killer of his responsibility. Blaming a curse for Heather O'Rourke's death obscures the painful questions surrounding her medical care and the immense grief of a family who lost a child. The curse narrative, unintentionally, transforms complex and devastating human tragedies into a form of ghoulish entertainment, a spooky story to be told around a campfire or on YouTube, which does a great disservice to the memory of those who were lost. Decades after the credits rolled on the original trilogy, the Poltergeist curse remains one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. Its persistence raises a fascinating question. Behind the spooky details, why is this particular story held such a powerful grip on society's collective imagination? And the answer lies in a combination of storytelling, media amplification, and a deep-seated human need to find meaning in the face of chaos. At its core, The Curse is simply a fantastic story. The narrative symmetry between the film's plot, disrespecting the dead leads to terrifying consequences, and the production's own transgression of using real skeletons is too perfect to ignore. It feels scripted, as if the universe itself were writing a horror story with the filmmakers as its unwitting protagonists. This narrative was then codified and amplified for new generations by television programs like E! True Hollywood Story, and more recently documentary series such as Shudder's Cursed Films. These shows package the disparate events into a cohesive dramatic narrative that prioritizes suspense over thinking about things rationally, cementing the legend in pop culture. On a deeper psychological level, The Curse provides a framework for understanding events that are otherwise terrifyingly random. The murder of a vibrant young woman, the sudden illness of a child, freak accidents on set. These are chaotic tragedies. A curse creates an order. It offers a cause and effect explanation, suggesting that these events happened for a reason, albeit a supernatural one. In a strange way, believing that a malevolent force is at work can be more comforting than accepting the alternative, that tragedy can strike anyone at any time for no reason at all. The Poltergeist curse speaks to our cultural fascination with the boundary between fiction and reality. It taps into fantasy that the horror we watch on screen might just be real, that it can bleed off the screen into our reality and affect us in strange ways. The idea suggests that horror films are not merely passive entertainment, but can be active, dangerous forces in the world. The legend of the Poltergeist curse is an expression of this fantasy, ensuring that for audiences today and tomorrow, the film's most famous line, "They're here," will always carry a chilling and perhaps not entirely fictional double meaning. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Please like, share, and hit the hype button. If you want, like to follow me on social media, my Twitter, Blue Sky, and TikTok is The Spooky Lawyer. If there is a spooky or disturbing story you would like me to cover, leave a comment and tell me about it. Or if you're feeling shy, send me an email. My email address is thespookylawyer@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a link in the description of this video and a link in my bio to buy me a coffee. So buy me a coffee. Or you can become a member of this channel. For the $1.99 tier, you can get access to exclusive content, including exclusive videos, as well as access to my videos before they go public. I appreciate you considering this. I'm going to put the names of all of the people who have donated to this channel here, and I'm going to put the names of all of the members of this channel here. Thank you all very much. You also support me by liking, sharing, hyping, and watching my videos. And I do really appreciate you watching my videos. And please stay spooky.